welcome to the Portland Children's Levy Allocation Committee meeting of March 31st. And I'm City Commissioner and Allocation Committee Chair Dan Saltzman. And with me today are my committee colleagues. On my right is Julie S. Young, who is the City of Portland Citizen Representative. On my far left is Serena Stoudemire-Wesley, who is the Multnomah County Citizen Representative. And on my immediate left is Multnomah County Chairwoman Deborah Kafori. And Mitch Horniker, who represents the Portland Business Alliance, is unable to be here today because he had to go out of town on the last minute. I'll introduce the Levy staff now. Director Lisa Pellegrino, Assistant Director Meg McElroy, Lisa Hansel, Mary Gay Broderick, and John Kelly. They're out and about somewhere. And before we get started in our agenda, I'd like to ask that we approve our minutes from our February 10th meeting. Entertain a motion to that effect.
So moved.
Second. Second, okay. All in favor say aye. Aye. Okay, the minutes are adopted. And next, as we always do in our meetings, we have an opportunity for public comment on any items generally related to the children's levy. We will have more time on our agenda later on to comment on specific strategies we may discuss about how to invest the additional resources that we have, which is the main topic of our meeting today. But we always, at the beginning of each meeting, have an opportunity for anybody in the public that wants to comment on any sort of non-agenda aspect of the children's levy to come and speak to us. Is there anybody here that wishes to do that? Okay, I see none. So now we will have staff lead us through the discussion on potential options for allocating an additional $8.1 million in funding through the end of 2017. And to refresh everyone's memory, at our last meeting, we decided not to run another request for investment process for various reasons, including the amount of time it takes to do so, especially since our intent to get these extra funds invested by July 1st. And also our goal, and also because we felt it was a pretty staff-intensive, allocation committee-intensive, and public-intensive process that we just ran late last year, or middle of last year. So the committee has agreed that we don't want to do additional requests for investments, but beyond that, we haven't really reached agreement on what we're going to do and how we're going to invest this $8.1 million. And that's where we have asked staff to come up with recommendations and thoughts, and they're going to now present those. And I think it's our goal, hopefully, that we can, as a committee, make some decisions by the middle of May, which isn't too far away. So, okay, I'll turn it over to Lisa Pellegrino.
Okay, I'm going to run through, and partly for the benefit of the public too, just to what we've done in the past. So this situation has presented itself at various points in time since the levy started, and there were different ways that we dealt with it. And I think when staff developed the options that Lisa and Meg are going to go into more detail on, we looked to the past efforts and how we did that and the kinds of things we thought about it to kind of frame our thoughts of what options might be. So briefly, I'll just kind of run through some of the way things were done in the past. We allocated additional revenues in 2004. At that point, the levy was ramping up gradually, so we ran separate funding rounds, and so the money was not necessarily being spent as quickly as it was being collected in taxes, and this led to some excess funds accumulating. And at that point, the committee decided it wanted to put some in reserves, which at that point it hadn't specifically, didn't have a formal policy about reserves, but since then we do. And they decided to allocate $2 million of the surplus, which was $6 million in that case, to another round of after-school and mentoring programs because the first round had been extremely competitive, and certain programs, particularly smaller ones, hadn't had much a chance of competition because everybody was lumped together with after-school and mentoring all in one category, and that made it really difficult to try to separate out. Since then, we've moved to a process where we separate out different types of after-school funding as well as mentoring from that. And then it also voted to put $3 million in a leverage fund, which was designed to try to leverage additional investments from other funders, private funders specifically. So this, over the course of that first levy, so those revenues were allocated at that point. After that point, additional revenues accumulated, partly just based on the economy, which was doing well, and the housing boom in particular, and additional taxes additional tax revenues accumulating at a faster rate than typical. And so the committee came together again in 2007 to consider how to allocate approximately $14 million in additional funds at that point. The bulk of that was decided to be put in essentially a sixth year of the levy. So it could fund ongoing investments for a sixth year, and it would delay the necessity to renew the levy. So that's sort of where the bulk of the money went, and that was partly due to the large size of what had accumulated. In addition, with the money that was not taken up by covering that sixth year, the committee decided it wanted to make an investment in childcare, in supporting childcare, quality childcare, and affordability. So it tasked the staff with convening an ad hoc group to consider what that might look like, and staff worked with that group to come up with a proposed plan, and then that was brought to the committee, and then the committee essentially approved the plan and allocated the money to the Child Care Resource and Referral to do a quality and affordability initiative. That ran for about 5 years and was then not able to be refunded due to declining revenues, which was the opposite problem that we had obviously dealt with before. In addition, some revenues were allocated to another leverage fund grant that we had pretty much finished out the leverage fund, and there was sort of a late appearing proposal, and the committee decided to consider that and devote some additional funding to that because they had sort of put their money in right as the last, or put their request in right as the last decisions were being made. So in 2009, most recently, in 2009, we had a smaller amount of accumulated revenue after we did a competitive funding round. That was after the levy was renewed for the second time. And we did a competitive funding round, and there was some additional funds for a variety of reasons that were left over after that, not a huge amount. And then there was some fund balance that accumulated. That happens when people don't spend out their full budget, and that can accumulate over time. We don't usually know what that is until all contracts end and we're able to calculate that fund balance. So that was a little over, it was about about $2.5 million, I guess, or do I have that right? Yeah, about $2.5 million that was allocated there, and the committee came together, and again, as you just decided it did not want to run another competitive funding process because it had just run one, and instead decided to focus these resources on funding some specific set of things in after school with some priorities that they then identified across other program areas. They decided to devote money to after school because that was such, again, a very competitive category, and there were specific things the committee had wanted to fund that they were not able to fund because there were not enough resources. So there was identifiable applications that several committee members wanted to fund, but were not able to find resources to do so. So the committee sort of set up its parameters as funding some new programs in after school, in the full service after school category, because that had been so competitive. It wanted to fund new culturally specific programs in the after school arena as well. And it wanted to increase investment in culturally specific programs that had already received grants. And those priorities were coming out of their stated priority to increase funding overall for culturally specific programs in that round. It also, in looking across all possible additional grants from people who had applied in that competitive funding round, they wanted to prioritize programs that most committee members had wanted to fund. So we specifically looked for programs where 3 out of the 5 committee members, at least 3 out of the 5 committee members had wanted to fund a program versus applications where only one person had wanted to fund it. And there was a set of programs that fell into that category. In addition, they wanted to prioritize higher scoring programs over lower scoring programs and trying to figure out how to choose which ones to augment or to fund. And they also considered the advocacy efforts of applicants. So folks did provide advocacy for their programs, and the committee did hear that. The process that they used in trying to make these additional grants was essentially like a slate process that was similar to what you do in a regular competitive funding round. You're making decisions, and for yourself, you're putting that in a slate, the staff is taking that information together, they're aggregating it, and then we're having a meeting in which we all come together with the amount of money that we have to spend and making the decisions like we would do in a regular meeting. So that's kind of the process that they used in that case. So that gives you a little bit of history, kind of what was done, often depending on the time in which the surplus arose, that had something to do with how it was disposed of or used to invest in kids. In trying to come up with some options for you all to consider at this sort of more high level kinds of things you might want to do, or buckets you might want to think about allocating or investing in. We look to the past to try to understand whether there's some similarities into what we're facing now, and trying to come up with a host of options for you. I'm going to put up, so we,
It's up, Lisa.
oh, it is, okay.
Doesn't all fit all the way.
It doesn't quite fit very well, but you can get kind of the gist of it. I'm not sure what to do about that. I'll see if Mary Gay or John can. Ah, there we go, okay. You can just make it full screen, but not as full screen as that.
There you
Perfect,
go.
thank you. We included in the materials available for the public and also including what we provided you. This chart gives a very sort of a summary view of the types of options that we came up with. Some of these have been historically done. So for instance, COLAs, we have given COLAs in the past. That's something that has been done when there's been funding to do so. COLAs are cost of living increases that allow to compensate for inflation for the increased cost that organizations experience in delivering their service.
That's based on the city's anticipated cost of living adjustment of 2.1%.
We're going to go over in detail
Oh, okay.
kind of how we got to these numbers, because that's something that, that we have not, what you'll see there is a minimum cost, and staff used various factors to try to figure out what that minimum cost would be, and we'll explain those when Lisa and Meg are going to detail the options for you. I just wanted to make sure it was up on the screen so folks who are here could see kind of the general areas that we were coming up with. It's not to say that we have to be limited to these, but these were the ones that through our brainstorming and through the things we've done in the past, came up with. So they are COLA, as I described, thinking about either unfunded applicants or increasing funding for current grantees. So we just ran a competitive funding round, returning to that pool of applicants and grantees to consider if you people want to either increase grants or fund things that weren't funded. Additional early childhood investments. Last time we prioritized early childhood on the general premise that investing early is the best use and wisest use of our funds. And last time, as I said, the Child Care Initiative was what came out of that priority. We also sketched out what a preschool expansion might look like, and Meg will go into a little bit more detail about that. We also through all of our, meeting with our grantees over time, there's been an expressed need, and in the past we have supported various kinds of technical assistance. We haven't done much in the way of quality, so we quality improvement, providing some kind of structures and funding to improve quality over time of programming. So that's what that option refers to. And then supporting system partners is hard to discuss generally. I'll let I think it's Meg who's going to talk about that, go into more detail about it. So the number of years you see in that column is the number of years over which that money would be spent. Okay, so that's what that refers to.
So I have a question about that.
Yeah.
Why did you choose 2 years for some of them and 4 years for others?
Well, the ones that are related to the grants specifically, so and grants that would need to be renewed, for like program level grants, which is, well, COLAs are something that is, we could put it this way, we could forecast using the money out over a longer period of time. But we figured this is money that's accruing over this 3-year period. The idea would be to try to spend most of it in that 3-year period. The Child Care Initiative, we had originally thought about it to be 2 years, but we're thinking that it probably didn't make sense to make a commitment to setting up the infrastructure for that without doing it for 4 years. The other ones, the grant-based ones would be eligible to renew. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because normally we consider renewals at the 3-year mark. So all those ones that are the 2 years, well, COLAs you can do if you have money. You can always do that. But the other ones would be more grant program that would renew. The other things are not that.
Okay. Yes,
That's
thank
why.
you. Specifically, I was thinking of the child care, to go through the trouble of setting that up and getting everybody signed up, and then to cut it after 2 years. It seems like that would be one, if we choose to do it, that we should do for the full.
Yes, that was absolutely our thinking. And honestly, we would want to do, it's not that we would not want to do the grant ones for a longer period of time, but we felt like because there would be a program grant in a similar sense, they would be renewed in a similar way that all of our other programs are. We collect the same data. It's just it's the same process. There would be no reason not to use that process, I guess is what I mean. So we would consider it then.
But then would we want to keep money back so that we would have the option of funding those programs again in 2 years? Or if we spent the entire 8.1 million, would we not be able to, after 2 years, fund those programs again.
Well, they're projecting that we will have the money for that. That's, that we should. If that projection doesn't come true, then we're always in that same boat. If the projection is not up to what they, in other words, they're projecting that the levels of funding that you would have at year 3 would continue on out through the levy.
For
Does that make
years
sense?
4 and 5.
For years 4 and
So that there
5.
would be
So there
enough
would
money
be
to do
adequate
that,
funds
okay.
to renew everything existing. And if there were more, there would be more that would then have to be allocated, right? It gets more and more uncertain the further out that we go. There's been kind of our experience with it. And in general, I feel like the estimates of what compression is going to do to us have never been very accurate. So we end up with more or less, but not, sometimes they're right on, but that doesn't happen, as often as I might like. So these were sort of, made with that in mind, that we would be able to continue whatever, and if you went that route and wanted to do those investments, that you would be able to continue them for the remainder of the levy, assuming that they perform and you want to keep doing them, like you would want to do them for anything. So that's kind of the general. I'll let the other folks get into specifics. Is there any kind of questions at the general level about what we're talking about here, or what any of these options are in the most big picture level? No?
You're gonna explain more?
Yep, we're going to go right into them now.
Yeah, okay.
But I just want to make sure there were no more kind of questions like that. Okay, take it away, Lise.
So the first preliminary option for consideration is the cost of living increases for current grantees. As Lisa mentioned, in the past, the levy has provided COLAs when revenues were adequate, and we were able to do that. The committee may want to consider doing this again, since grantees' costs for delivering services are affected by inflation. When levy revenues are flat, then services or staffing levels are compromised, or grantees need to secure additional revenues in order to cover the cost of inflation. For the upcoming fiscal year, the city has included a 2.1% COLA in its budget estimates. Using a 2.1% COLA for the remaining 2 years on all of the current levy grants, it's estimated to be $465,000 would be the cost of a COLA for that period of time. One thing to note is that this minimum was calculated just based on the current grants and the current grant levels that we have. So if the committee chose to fund some unfunded grants or increase the funding for current grantees, then the COLA amount would need to be adjusted accordingly.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
We don't have to, when we start to vote on these, we don't have to do, these aren't the order that we have to do these in. We can do these in a different order.
Right,
This
and
is a
this is
discussion.
just, right
Okay.
now, for the process, what we thought we would do is just run through and give an overview of what each of these preliminary options are,
Okay.
and have you ask questions about what the options are if they come, as they come up. And then after we go through a description of each of these, then to have discussion, open it up for discussion.
For
Is that-
prioritizing.
Right, for
Okay.
seeing what additional information you might need, whatever discussion you want to have about each of these items, present or propose additional options for consideration.
Okay.
Okay? Any other questions about COLA? Pretty straightforward. Okay. So the second option for consideration is funding for unfunded applicants and increased funding for current grantees. Lisa gave the history on what was done in 2009 around this, so I won't repeat that. But building upon the past practice and using similar criteria, staff is suggesting a couple of things for consideration. First, prioritizing grants where a majority of committee members indicated an interest in funding at a higher level than was actually awarded. This happened in 2 program areas: child abuse prevention, intervention, and foster care. There were several cases in which a majority of the committee members had indicated on their slates that they were interested in funding at a higher level than what actually got awarded. And this was done in an effort to spread the funds over more programs, so more programs could be funded in those areas. So if the committee is interested in increasing funding for current grantees, you might want to consider prioritizing this group of grantees for additional funding. And in your packets, and also in the packets provided for the audience, is a handout. It's a double-sided handout that shows which programs those are and the amount of funding that allocation committee members, that a majority of allocation committee members had expressed an interest in funding, if that makes sense. It also shows the amount requested, the amount that staff recommended, the amount then of votes and funding level by allocation committee members, and the difference between what a majority of the allocation committee members had voted or had indicated on their slates and what actually was awarded as funding. So hopefully that makes sense there. And so in some cases that's just, it was, say the allocation committee members wanted to, 3 out of 5 allocation committee members wanted to fund at $400,000 and it was funded at $390,000. So that would show a $10,000 difference in that column. In some cases there were, a majority of allocation committee members wanted to fund at a higher level than was actually funded, but there were differing amounts. And so in those situations, you'll see a range of dollar amount. So any questions about that piece and what's happening with child abuse prevention and foster care? Okay. And the next thing to consider is unfunded applications or prioritizing funding for 3 hunger relief programs that weren't awarded funding. And these 3 applications scored highly. They were recommended by staff, and 2 out of 5 committee members voted to fund these applications. And there's another handout in your packet, and also in the packet for the audience, that shows those 3 programs. They're highlighted in gray, I believe, since we didn't do color copies. And you'll see those 3, the information, it's the summary information of those programs. And so for those 2 pieces of the option to consider, the approximate minimum 2-year funding amount for the child abuse prevention, foster care, and hunger relief programs just discussed is $1 million, and that's using the low end of the range that you'll see, and in the child abuse and foster care, you'll see on the bottom row it's a 2-year funding amount, and then the low end of that plus the amount that staff had recommended for the 3 hunger relief programs is how we calculated $1 million over the 2-year period. So any questions about those 2 before we move on to the next piece of this?
I have a quick question. So
Sure.
in the first section of A, in the child abuse and foster care program areas, those were actually funded. But in the
Right,
hunger relief programs, those were not funded.
that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
That's correct. That's why those charts look different, because we couldn't make them look the same. They're different. Thank you for asking the clarification. So the other thing, the committee may want to choose or may want to develop additional parameters for funding unfunded or increasing grants, current grants. The grants and applications that I just discussed are the only ones in which a majority or at least 2 committee members voted to fund at a higher level or wanted to fund but were unfunded. So if the committee is interested in funding some other unfunded applications and or increasing grant amounts for current grantees, you'll need to establish some parameters in which to do that. Without creating additional parameters to guide the decision-making, it'll be difficult to decide which applications to reconsider and on what basis to award the grants. So just some examples of, you heard examples of parameters that were set in 2009. Some other kinds of things that you might consider. Consider unfunded applications that scored at least 85, met the strategy requirements, perhaps are culturally specific. You might also consider increasing funded grants for culturally specific services or increasing funded grants that are serving East. Both of those were priorities throughout the levy. You may want to consider increasing funded grants that were awarded a smaller amount compared to the amount that they had requested. There are some situations where there was a large discrepancy between what was requested and what was actually awarded. It may be worth looking at those to see, is there something there that you want to do? And our thought here is once the committee establishes some of those parameters, then we could come back and provide the analysis, show you, like the worksheets that we provided today, what that might look like. Which grants are those that, for example, received a much smaller amount compared to what they requested? So questions about that piece of the option?
No, I'll ask the question later, because
Okay.
once you go through everything.
We'll discuss, the idea is
it'll be
just to get it on the
discussed.
table,
This
to
is
make sure
just
we're
a-
all dealing with the same base of knowledge before we try to discuss it, basically.
I guess, well, if you went, the option you were just discussing, if we were to open it up to programs that we didn't invest in before, and you went with high scoring, and culturally specific and east of 82nd, aren't you double counting sort of bonus points that we gave in the first round, if you do it that way?
Well, I mean, they got bonus points,
would have
but
gotten
the
bonus
question is, do you want to prioritize those for additional funding? And that's just your choice. If you want to prioritize it, you don't have, and again, you can set priorities to have all of these things, have some of these, do you see what I'm saying? You can look at it through a series of lenses. Okay, here's the set of variables that you want to see. Here's who falls into which categories.
Okay.
And then you could decide to set whatever priorities you wanted to. I mean, that's,
Right, these are just examples and not endless example. I mean, there are
Okay.
lots of different ways to look at it.
Okay.
we're not necessarily recommending that you pick any one thing.
Yeah,
I think these are the kinds of things that we have prioritized in the past. And these are, just general emphases for the levy, I'd say.
Turn it over to Meg.
All right, we'll move on to the next part of the preliminary options that are on the table for everyone to look at in the chart. So the two early childhood options, preschool expansion and the child care initiative, as Lisa indicated earlier, in 2007, when there were additional unanticipated revenues, we did invest in a 5-year initiative to support quality child care and particularly affordability of quality child care for low-income families. And that initiative was highly successful. It was professionally evaluated and unfortunately was phased out as revenues declined. So it was natural for us to sort of revisit looking at that initiative. And in addition, the other thing we had considered was expanding preschool slots with existing Oregon pre-kindergarten Head Start providers in the city. Additional Head Start and preschool slots would meet demonstrated need by all these programs. They each have extensive wait lists, and it fits with our existing early childhood priorities that were adopted by the allocation committee. In looking at the preschool expansion idea, we estimated a minimum amount of $1.6 million. That's based on having a classroom at each of the existing 4 Oregon pre-kindergarten Head Start providers in the city, operating for those classrooms for 2 years, and having it be a full-day model, so not a half-day classroom, but a full day. There are many details that would need to be worked out, obviously, for this type of an initiative to move forward, not the least of which is whether or not the existing providers have space to open new classrooms and the ability to expand, and kind of what their wait lists look like. So again, this is just sort of our brainstorming, our idea, and if you are very interested in it, then we would pursue what additional details you would need to be comfortable with moving forward on it. With the child care initiative and revisiting that, we estimated approximately investing $2 million over 4 years. And Deborah, as you noted, mainly because looking at our past experience with the initiative, the time it took to get it up and running, and then once it was up and running, the demand for it and how well it was used. I would say it took about a full year to get it up and running, for providers to understand that it existed, for families to know that it existed. But once it was up and running, it was highly successful and very quick to take off, which is not surprising because I think once one family knows there's such a great resource available, they're telling everyone that they know it's available too.
So those that $2 million estimate is based on essentially the time period over which we operated last time and the scale by which we operated. So over 4 years, we served about 400 children, and the average monthly subsidy was $400 a month. So, any questions on those two early childhood?
Can you remind me who the 4 local providers are?
Yes, absolutely. Albina Head Start, Mount Hood Community College Head Start, Portland Public Schools Head Start, and Neighborhood House operates an Oregon pre-kindergarten program.
Right, thank you.
Welcome.
On the child care initiative, I just would additionally note that it's not to say that you couldn't spend more on that. I mean, in other words, it's not to, you don't necessarily need a lot more staffing at the R&R to be able to help more families. So that's something that we felt like this was like the minimum to do at least what we had done in the past. So that's just to be clear about that.
That's a really good point. Can you remind me, you just said it was how many families were served over that?
The last time the entire initiative ran over 5 years, but I would say that the affordability part took a little while to get up and running, so it was really a 4-year piece of the work. And there were close to 400 children, 392, I think is the exact number. And it was close to 250 families because most of the families who took advantage of it had more than one child in care. And the subsidy amount was about $400. Actually, I think it was per family, not per child.
And most of those families stayed in through I should probably reread that.
Different ones stayed for different amounts of times. It depended on the age of their children. And it also included after-school care. So children up to the age of 12 were included in who were served because oftentimes families have, children in those age ranges. One of the key pieces of the initiative was that families had to use childcare that had met a certain set of quality standards, which we had worked out with the Child Care Resource and Referral, sort of the experts in childcare. In addition, any child that qualified or that were to be served with the city's subsidy dollars had to be on the state's employment-related daycare subsidy. So we wanted to make sure that we were maximizing our dollars as the city by assuring that any child that was eligible for the state's subsidy was receiving that support in addition to being able to be eligible for the city's support. And so sort of the math of it was that from the family's point of view, they were to have to pay no more than 10% of their annual income on childcare. So the state picked up whatever portion of that they were willing to pick up, and then the levy funded sort of the difference between where the state's subsidy dropped off and the cost of childcare and 10% of the family's income, if that makes sense.
And quality childcare, the point was to be able to allow access to quality childcare for low-income families that is often out of reach cost-wise.
And there were over 50 childcare providers who participated in that last time, about less than half of which were centers, and then the other portion were family childcare providers. And the evaluation results demonstrated that for the family childcare providers in particular, they reinvested a lot of that stable income over time into the quality of their care. So it ended up being a benefit not only to the kids who were receiving the affordability subsidy, but to all of the kids who were with that provider because the quality was reinvested. So it ended up producing a lot of benefits that were quantified well in the evaluation. All right, so the next two items on our table as far as ideas are concerned, as Lisa mentioned earlier, we have in the past put money toward technical assistance with grantees around their evaluation and reporting. This is an ongoing need of grantees. As we all learn more in our respective fields of work, we all recognize that there are things that we can be doing better in the service delivery, as well as how well we measure and assess how well we're doing with service delivery. So this is kind of an ongoing cost need, I would say, for all levy grantees. When we were preparing to work with you all last summer around the goals and strategies to be adopted for this 5-year levy, one of the things that we had looked at were how the other children's levies on the West Coast were kind of doing this work, so San Francisco and Seattle. And one of the things that we learned was that both of them are investing significant resources into quality improvement supports with their grantees. In Seattle, they're using the youth program quality assessment system, which is a very robust and kind of intensive way for after-school and youth development programs to look at how well those programs operate with the kids that they serve from a number of different domains. So that's sort of an example of what type of work we could be doing with our grantees with some investment in this arena. In addition, our grantees have consistently said that more support for training and professional development would be greatly appreciated. Private funders in this community put a lot of money into those types of efforts, some of which benefit our grantees, but a lot of which don't. Many of the private funders are funding all over the state, not just in Portland. So for our specific grantees and the specific programs that we're funding those agencies to operate, having some additional support around professional development and training would be greatly appreciated. So when we looked at estimating costs for that, again, we looked at a 4-year cost because we have some of those, the grants we have now are renewable at the 3-year mark. So we could conceivably be funding folks through the end of this levy term and wanting to be able to support them over that lifespan. So we looked at a 4-year cost of about $1 million. That $250,000, if you divided it across our program areas, gets to be around $50,000 or less per program area per year. So.
I have a question regarding this one, and obviously, well, I shouldn't say obviously, maybe we would, but probably would not be requesting proposals as to how organizations wish to use these funds. So would this be something that staff would propose to the allocation committee? There are more specific suggestions for how it would look and how you could provide equity among all our grantees?
Yeah, I mean, I think we would certainly be doing some of this in consultation with grantees, kind of trying to prioritize what supports they would like from us. And I think we already internally have some of those ideas identified by what we've heard from them and what we read in reports from grantees about what they could use. So yes, absolutely.
It would be a plan. I mean, my thought was that basically we would work with grantees, to develop a plan, and we have to spec out what it costs to do different things, which we haven't done because we haven't had the opportunity. So, I mean, that's our best guess. It may be wrong, maybe that there's cost more or less, but we'd have to come back to you if that was the case.
I think one thing, Julie, to help maybe provide additional context, in the past we've had contracts with MPC Research or Portland State to help us with this work. So it hasn't been the case where we've fielded applications from grantees about what they wanted to buy, but it was a more whole program area, whole cohort approach to the work where everybody was kind of involved, and then the consultants that we had hired worked with them to meet them on their individual needs, but also kind of moving toward goals as a cohort, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, and then the final option here, supporting system partners. As staff, we work with a lot of system partners in our arena around policy, around service coordination, around data management, data tracking, outcome measurement. We work with All Hands Raised, the Sun Service System, Early Learning Multnomah, private funders through the Youth Development Funders Roundtable and the Early Childhood Funders Roundtable, and there's now a new group forming, looking specifically at child abuse prevention called Elevating Prevention. So in all of the work that we do in this arena, we have wondered whether it would be helpful to set aside funds to support our partners and colleagues in various system building efforts. This could look like helping with service and outcome coordination, alignment of measurement of outcomes and data reporting. And so in thinking about that, we looked at a 4-year cost of $500,000. And again, this is one of those things where we'd have to identify specifically with different partners what types of things our resources could help support. But that was another idea that came to mind, especially in today's environment of collective impact. Being able to help put actual dollar resources towards some of the collective impact efforts would go a long way, and small dollar amounts being proposed.
Can you give, I don't know, 1 or 2
An-
tangible examples
An
of that?
example of that.
Well, for instance, the Sun Service System, who we work extensively with, they sit together as a council, and they are all together as a council trying to prioritize what they think their areas for additional investment are. And so they haven't come to a conclusion yet. They're still meeting. But whatever those priorities get to be. I mean, one of the priorities was doing COLAs, which actually we would cover by doing this if we did it. Another was they were thinking about was culturally specific academic advocacy. There's just different kinds of priorities that they identify within all systems and trying to figure out what makes sense. So that would be a group identified priority that it might make sense to contribute funding to. That's more of a
We'd be
service.
contributing to the tangible product as opposed to
Yes.
the investment in the process.
In that case, yes, because that group is coming together trying to think about what they're trying to advance in terms of outcomes and services for a set of youth. So that's more geared that way. All Hands Raised is not, for instance, a direct service providing entity necessarily, but their collaboratives are typically made up of service providers who are working to try to accomplish something that advances those outcomes, those big level outcomes they have. So there are efforts that they undertake. There are different kinds of things they do to try to get there. The youth one that I've been working with is working significantly on attendance. There's another group that's working significantly around aligning measurement and aligning measurement tools. That takes some resource often to be able to move that forward. So it's those kinds of things. Again, we would bring it to you with a specific thing. It's not. This would be more like a bucket approach where you would set aside the funding, but on condition of you approving the specific thing that would be done. But it would be coming more from staff and partners, not coming from the service providers necessarily. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thanks.
So I think we've gone over all of the options and wanted to turn it over next to sort of facilitate discussion on how you'd like to sort of consider these. I think, Serena, you were thinking about prioritizing them, I heard you say earlier.
Yeah, which would be their top priority. But I also was looking at the preschool expansion because of the slots and early learning, things that we know about early learning, why we couldn't increase that to 2 million instead of at the 1.6.
I mean, I think these are the questions before you in terms of these options as they are now. We estimated a minimum funding amount, sort of like it wouldn't be logical to go much below this,
Right.
but above it, yes. It just means you may be deciding to take that out of another option or, yeah.
I was thinking more of the kiddos and being ready for kindergarten.
Yeah.
I have a question. Maybe I missed it at the beginning. I'm not sure what exactly that you're looking from for us today. We're not going to be voting. We're giving you direction to come back with more information. Is that kind of what we're?
I mean, I think that here's things that I could imagine you trying to move toward today. Is there anything you really want to take off the table that you're not interested in? And so let's forget that. Is there something missing that you would want to be added to consideration for this list? Kind of at this I'm thinking at this higher level type of thing, an area to which you would want to put money that we didn't think about. Is there anything you absolutely would want to do in a second? And let's then therefore decide. I mean, I think most of these would require more work than that, and then I think the other thing is, first of all, you can take testimony on what people think about these overall options to hear what people's thoughts are about that. I think that it would be helpful to come to consensus about which things you want us to pursue to bring back to you in a format at which you could then make decisions if you wanted to. So I think some of these would require us to do more work. For instance, your question that you just asked about adding additional resources to something, we have had no conversations with anybody about any of these things. So I think we'd have to talk to people about whether, okay, well, what would be the reasonable expansion we could look at.
Well, I would like to, Chair, if you're interested, I would like to hear from folks in the room who are receive our dollars or who haven't received our dollars about what their priority directions are. Is that something?
Sure. I mean, open up for some public comment right
Yeah.
now.
And I don't know if people are prepared for that, but it would be interesting to hear from folks.
Okay, that sounds like a good thing to do. And show of hands, how many people want to talk to us? A shy bunch. Oh, okay, I see. I see 3. Okay, why don't you, the 3 of you that raise your hands, come on up. And if anybody changes their mind while they're listening to the others, then you can come up afterwards. But we have 3 chairs here, so come on up 3 at a time. And we'll give you each up to 3 minutes. Do you have control of the timer? Okay, so there's a timer in front of you. And if you can just give us your name and your organization, if you have an organization. and we'll start with you.
Hi, I'm Jerry Janowski. I'm the Executive Director of Saturday Academy. Thanks so much for giving us an opportunity. I first actually have a question for the staff, and that is that you didn't talk about leverage or the result of that when those funds have been used for that in the past, so that didn't get brought up, and I thought we might want to think about it. And the second is we were funded partially for an after-school program. It was approved, it was highly rated, but we didn't get as nearly as much money as what we had sought, and therefore a whole part of the program for the summer isn't there. But you don't have a list of all of those programs that were brought up that were funded, but only partially funded. So I think before you go any further, really getting that list the way you have a list here, for instance, of the hunger programs that weren't funded would be very, very useful for you. So I would recommend you take a look at the ratings and also how the programs have done in this year so far, so that you are funding those that are meeting the targets, et cetera. Certainly, we would love to be considered.
Yeah, thank you.
So sorry, somebody just shouldn't have brought that up here. Somebody wrecked my brain already on something else that I have to do. Tana Sanchez, Director of Family Services at NAIA Family Center. So needless to say, we submitted several proposals to the levy and would be very excited about the opportunity to either get to the place where we had submitted those proposals at, or to fund those things that we prioritized as new, one being the early childhood piece. We still have the possibility of the commitment through Portland Public Schools to create that process for our kiddos. We know it's something that our community is really excited about, and we're working on other avenues to do it, but that would be something we'd be really, really happy with. Thanks.
All right, good afternoon. I think I'm a little deeper than I planned on.
Yeah.
Gerald Deloney from Self Enhancement Incorporated. I think not having a competitive process is a good process. But I think the other part of that is that if you start funding unfunded programs that didn't get funded in a competitive process, it's kind of like a contradiction to that, is that we're not going to have a competitive process, but we're going to fund folks that didn't make the line. So I think there's a little problem with that. And then looking at the last two categories of technical assistance, and then the other category was working with system partners. I think it needs to be better defined between the two, because I do agree with staff that there's enough, like the Sun system. There's data teams all over the place, let me say that. United Way has all of their grantees. They did 30 grantees. They did some more grantees. They're all working together to do this data. And I think that there can be an assist, and same all hands raises in it and everything else. But we need to start coming up with some common terms and definitions so that we can start evaluating things in the same way, because right now we're all over the place. And, you know, when you do something like the levy, for instance, we're talking about multi-year funding. So we got to get folks up and running. We got to make sure these things are going, and then start making evaluations in a time frame that starts to make some sense about doing evaluation. You know, a 6-month evaluation for the first year, it can tell you whether people are doing things, but when we start talking about those quality outcomes, you're going to get those quality outcomes over time. So if you don't give yourself the opportunity to do that, then you don't really get that. And then finally, as an operator, getting funding multi-year provides stability, so that I go out and hire staff. I know I got staff knows they're going to be there. We can start doing program enhancements. So I would hope that a lot of the funding is done in that way, so that programs can reach a comfort level and not worry about where my next dollar's coming from, but worrying about the quality of service that I'm trying to provide to my constituents. So I think I said everything I wanted to say.
Okay. Thank you all.
This is a nice situation to be in.
Yes.
Yeah, having money is always good.
Better than not.
Yes.
Are there any others that wish to come up? Okay, why don't you come on up 3 at a time? And again, you each have up to 3 minutes, and you can just give us your name and your organization. We'll start with you.
Sure. Thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to provide some feedback. My name's Kitty Hofstetter. I'm a clinical manager with Morrison Child and Family Services. And I just wanted to speak to the opportunity that Morrison has had previously with Portland Children Levy funds. I oversee the Family Sexual Abuse Treatment Program. And although we did not reapply for funding, we had initially applied under the leverage category, and that wasn't open this time, and so we didn't see ourselves in the opportunities that were out. And so I would just like to urge people to reconsider opening it up for competitive process so that we would have an opportunity to reapply again. That would allow us to provide services that when clients come in that are restricted because of different funding requirements, that we would have more flexibility in providing additional services to them for a longer amount of time for those kids who are very traumatized and maybe need additional services outside of what gets authorized from the mental health system, as well as people who, because our program only works with Medicaid clients, we could potentially, we do get a lot of referrals for families that have private insurance, and we're not able to provide services to those families in this area. So it would just really give us a lot more flexibility, and we are the only program that specifically is designed to serve families that are affected by sexual abuse. And so it is a really nice opportunity. We're a very small program, and we have very good outcomes with the services that we provide. So thank you so much for giving me the opportunity.
Great, thank you.
I'm Diane Tooch with LifeWorks Northwest Children's Relief Nursery, one of your grantees. Excuse me. I just want to speak positively for the COLA. I think it's, when we looked at the budget and knew how much we'd be getting the same amount every year, and we feed our children, and the cost of food is going up, and we have staff. And so I think that's a good investment to make sure that the quality stays there and that the services are available at the level when, at the end, as when we started. So, thank you.
Hi, I'm Amber Baker. I'm the program director of Village Gardens, which is part of Janus Youth Programs. And I just wanted to come and encourage you to consider funding some of the unfunded project proposals in the hunger relief category. I know that our project was ranked highly in that competitive process. I know that what we bring to the table around hunger relief and food access is a unique community-led approach and a really upstream approach to that hunger relief work that I believe is really transforming the community from the ground up while also meeting immediate food needs of folks. So while I know that there may be some reason not to look at unfunded projects, I do think that in this particular case, in this focus area, there were projects that were ranked highly and that have a lot of valid reasons for support, and I just urge you to consider that in your process today. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, come on up. Welcome. Again, just you each have up to 3 minutes, and just give us your name and organization, and we'll start with you, sir.
Arthur Davis with Oregon Mesa, and we bring STEM education to low-income, minority youth and girls in middle school and high school. We're housed at PSU. I believe I respect the complexity of the investment process, the RFI process. I do believe that not only Mesa, but a number of other programs in Portland can offer a high impact at a low dollar amount. And so even thinking maybe towards a tiered structure, but I believe there are investments that could be made that could really reach kids in the city with relatively few dollars. I believe Oregon Mesa is one, and there could be others. Thank you.
Thank you. Suzanne?
My name is Suzanne Washington with Meals on Wheels people, and I also want to speak to the COLA and urge you to fund that, not just over 2 years, but 4 years, the course of the whole grant, so that we can maintain quality of services and support our staff properly, and really not compromise those services. I also think it's a great idea to look at those in the hunger relief category, which is what we were funded in, to look at some of those highly ranked programs that were not funded and consider them as well. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Dara Snyder, and I'm the Social Justice Program Manager with Impact Northwest, and I'd like to thank you for this opportunity. I'm speaking here today on behalf of Urban Opportunities. Our program staff are currently serving CSEC youth and did not want to cancel their group session even for one day, as consistency is so very important to traumatized teens who are rebuilding their lives. Our first ask is that the minimum annual funding level be increased to $100,000 per year to ensure a high level of quality services are sustained. I do have that in writing, which I'll be sure to leave with you. Urban Opportunities works closely with youth at high poverty high schools to teach the fundamental components of job search and career development while developing transferable soft skills that support higher functioning in school and in the community. We have a long history of high quality services to some of our community's most under-resourced high school students, and we're proud of our proven ability to engage low-income challenged youth in relevant and meaningful ways. We have met 100% of our outcomes since our partnership with PCL has began, including engagement and increased self-confidence in the job-seeking process. However, since reductions in the funding, we have been forced to pull out of two very high-need Portland public schools, Jefferson and Madison, and seek support from you to allow us to restore our full range of service sites, which include vital job readiness skills and training, paid internships and employment opportunities, as well as elective credit for those not on track to graduate on time. Furthermore, while we work to engage former students to the best of our capacity, it has been evident that graduates continue to have needs in terms of job search and retention skills, as well as engaging in professional development and networking activities. If granted, Urban Opportunities would be able to institute a formal follow-up support program for graduates in need of ongoing mentorship, support, and training, including peer groups, skills workshops, and assistance navigating community job and career resources. In 2012-2013, Urban Opportunities had a 33% reduction in funding down to $54,000, and we had to reduce the services we could provide as a result. In the latest round of funding, we were not restored to previous levels. If funding is restored, we would begin serving Madison and Jefferson again, restoring our full range of service sites, including two very high-need schools. And if funding is increased to $100,000, we will formally implement a follow-up program to graduates, including ongoing assistance with job search and retention, continued career readiness, skills-based activities, connecting young adults to meaningful community activities, and it would allow us to increase a position to 0.8 position to all the team to coordinate and facilitate the restored and increased programming. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you all. Do we have others? Okay. This will be the last ones. Welcome, and again, just give us your name and your organization, and you each have up to 3 minutes, and we'll start with you.
I'll start with me. I will be less than 3 minutes. My name is Julie Houston. I'm from Impact Northwest as well, and I'm with the Early Childhood Department. One of our programs was not funded this round that had previously been funded, and so I am encouraging the opportunity to fund programs who have been successful in the past and meet a great need in the community. I'm speaking about our Parent-Child Involvement Project partnership with Gateway Center for Children and Families, for families impacted by domestic violence, providing child-parent psychotherapy. I am hoping that the success of the past program the success of the past program can open that door to funding that program again, because the need out there is so great for those children and families. And I would also support the COLA raise over the time. So thank you.
So you were not funded in the most recent round of 2014, but you were previously.
We were previously. Our proposal did not reflect the quality of our program.
Okay. Yeah.
Hi, Rachel Spiegel, Impact Northwest, Director of Youth and Family Services. I'm here today to talk about AKA Science. And this program, like many others, survives on the dedication of program staff to provide science classes for students who would not otherwise have access to them. Some elementary schools in the area don't have any dedicated time for elementary science instruction. We know that elementary school exposure to science is critical to children's formation of their identity in STEM, and that is especially true for students of color and girls who often become disenfranchised from science as early as elementary school. AKA Science for its first year with Impact Northwest was 2011 and 12. In that year, AKA had a budget cut of 4.5%. In 2012 and 13, there was a 30% reduction. In 2014-15, we now have $59,000 from the Portland Children's Levy. Over the previous 3 years, we had filled all requests for AKA science classes from qualifying SUN programs in the Portland area. This is the first year we have had to say no to some requests for a class. We had been able to maintain our previous level of services based on reserves of program supplies that came with AKA Science. Those are gone, and now as we purchase supplies and try and generate fees and other revenues, we're really struggling to meet the demand that is out there for elementary school students to do experiential science classes. And we ask you to please consider restoring funding to those who did not get their full ask. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Lisa Pellegrino? So this is the time for us to sort of have some discussion, maybe give some feedback to staff about maybe avenues to pursue, avenues not to pursue, questions. Yeah.
Thank you. I want to thank everyone who shared their organization's experiences with us. It's really, really important, and thank you for doing that. And you're always encouraged to do so by email. You know, I know my inbox will be flooded, but you know that's what we're doing. It's important work, and if you email me, I will read your email. So I want you to know that. I would ask staff to help to come back to the allocation committee with additional information on programs that did not receive their full funding in this most recent round. And to give a sense, a greater sense beyond the information here that we have on child abuse prevention and intervention and the help me?
Foster care.
Foster care. Particularly where the organizations ranked in terms of, I know one in the past, apparently a threshold of 85 or higher has been used. So just a reminder to us of how the organizations were ranked when they were reviewed by our reviewers. That would be helpful to me. And then the amounts of where funding was, they didn't reach the amount that they requested. And then also for all of the current grantees, for staff to help us also know where these organizations are in terms of, I believe you will have now received a 6-month evaluation from these organizations.
A midterm report, not an evaluation, but yes, a midterm report.
A midterm,
yes.
I'm sorry, yes, midterm. And so, you know, in terms of how are folks doing, where they are in meeting what their goals are in situations that maybe we should be aware of. Also, some organizations, I can't imagine anyone wanting to turn money down, but in some cases, just bumping up a little bit of money doesn't necessarily probably work into a whole staff person. Or so if there's other information, maybe that's asking for way too much work for you to go back to all the grantees.
I mean, just keep in mind, we have 59 grantees,
Yeah.
And so I think if we're going to go to some sort of individual level something or other that is about, then I wonder if maybe we ought to, if you want to look at some of these other screens as potentials first, and then maybe think about that as you narrow down potentially. I don't know that it's feasible for us to discuss. What would it mean if we increased each? I mean, typically that's something that staff negotiates in general. You know, so when you give an award, it's usually not what people asked for. So what's in their proposal and what they want to do, we have to go in and say, okay, now what can we do for the amount that's awarded? It may be only a half of what you asked for. So how are we going to cut this down to be able to be right-sized for the funding? So that's something that we're always dealing with, and I think that you're right that it's possible that smaller amounts of money may not be useful to people, but I think that probably you're going to have to look at a range of things and screen before we can ask those questions. Does that make sense? To narrow down how many questions we're asking.
That's fair. Yes.
I just don't want to raise expectations as to what's possible in what time frame. Are there, along those lines, are there other types of things, it sounds like people, or at least Julie anyway, is interested in looking at existing grantees or at least people who applied in the previous rounds and kind of where that fell out. Are there other things that people want to know? Are people in favor of looking at this? It would be helpful to know.
Well, I think in a way to kind of narrow down here that personally I would just go for the COLA and do, I think that's something that we should definitely do.
Could you say why you, I mean, there was testimony about making the COLA 4 years? Why you put in 2 years?
Just basically because we don't know that every grant will renew, so I can't really make an estimate. I mean, we go through a renewal process. It's not an automatic situation, so that's mainly why.
Okay.
I mean, we could do it again, like I said, if there's, assuming our revenues are what they projected, we should be able to do it.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
we don't know that every grant will renew.
That's a very good point. So that would be a top priority for me. I also, actually, I think that I agree with Julie about looking at some more data around the unfunded applicants. I'm sorry, around the current, both the unfunded applicants, but the increased funding for our current grantees. And then I'm in favor of the preschool expansion and the child care initiative as well. My question about the technical assistance is that I didn't hear a lot from our grantees that they wanted it. And it's something that I think is a good idea, but I don't know if people, I'd want some more information about that, whether people are just not coming forward and saying, yeah, this is really important, and your prior experience, whether you believe that this is a really important area for us to fund before we make that decision. And the same with the supporting system partners. If we're going to go in that direction, it seems that, I mean, you admitted that it's a little nebulous, and I would like to really have some more specifics because I don't know that that's where I would put my priority.
Would you want to hear from the partners that we work from? Because, I mean, we didn't solicit them to come and talk, but we could.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm gonna ditto Deborah on the first 4, on the COLA, the unfunded, and increase the funding for current and the preschool expansion, but I still would like to put on the table a possible increase for the preschool. Once we know if there's gonna be the capacity for the slots, additional slots for preschool, so a little bit more information on that, but that's where I am. And then also for the child care initiative. And then the other 2, we only heard from one person that really spoke to those last 2 things, so it would be nice to have some additional information on that, but the first 4, yes. And also what Julie said about having some additional information so we'll know how folks are doing so far in meeting their outcomes for the mid evaluations. Like she was talking about where folks are,
Yep.
as Julie was saying.
Yeah, I mean, the main things we know at this point is how well they're doing with being on target with service goals. Outcomes are usually reported at the end of the year, and also just how well they're doing in spending out their current year grant funds. So those are 2.
That would be really good to know.
Okay.
Because you don't want to, if someone's not spending out their money, why give them additional funding?
Yes.
Yes, I said it.
Well, there's sometimes good reasons for, I mean, you know,
I know.
you do have to look at each case on that one, but we're happy to give you the
Exactly. Well,
information. And
each one individually,
yes, we
but-
can give you the information.
So I think that I'm basically definitely supportive of the COLA. Focusing on the full funding needs of some of the foster care and then the child abuse and prevention investments that you provided us. I'm okay with the hunger relief, although I'm sort of being inconsistent because I'm not sure I want to open up other investment categories to applications that didn't succeed last time, but nevertheless, I'm comfortable supporting that if I can rationalize the inconsistency. I definitely support the preschool expansion and the child care initiative, the technical assistance, but I am not supporting the supporting system partners. It's just it's a lot of money. I guess I wouldn't support it at $500,000, and I guess I'm a little questioning what it really goes to. I mean, despite the question and answer we just had, I'm not sure it's going to be going towards things that are consistent with the Children's Levy objectives of investing in proven programs as opposed to investing in system discussions, which I'll be the first to admit I'm not a big fan of big system discussions. So that may bias me.
But we wouldn't be investing just in discussing. So I think you can feel assured of that. The other thing to keep in mind is that the idea would be that we would be coming to you with a specific proposal. Okay, you would be looking at something that was specific, not, in other words, if we didn't come up with anything you wanted to do, then I think you'd return the money to the fund and give it out at renewal. Does that make sense? So it's not like you would be necessarily obligating to spend it if you didn't want to do any of the things that people wanted to do.
Right.
So, I mean, I'm not trying to necessarily argue one way or the other. I'm just saying that's what we would envision, is that you would be looking at specific things. You would not be looking at a general thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I guess just, given the choice of investing in that versus additional pre-K, I'd go with the pre-K, if there is the capacity for that. Well, I think that's, does that give you?
I was just going to add that because I didn't comment on the other recommendations or suggestions from staff. I too agree with the COLA. Preschool expansion and child care initiative actually I would put, if there were additional dollars, I would put in under the child care initiative, because it sounds like once that is up, it has great opportunity to do a lot of important work without a lot of extra staff time and so on. So that would be very good. I think working with our grantees on quality improvement and technical assistance is extremely a great opportunity. And if we hear more from people about the value of that, I would be open to doing so. System partners, kind of along the lines of what Dan is saying, that's a bit of a stretch for me, but perhaps reducing the amount that we would have in that, held aside, that might be available for suggestions from staff, but maybe not the full amount of what is being suggested here of the, what was it, 200? 500,000, yeah, I would do maybe half of that, and see how we feel about that. So, modifying.
Okay.
So, I mean, we're sort of at the point where we've given you some initial ideas of where we are, and I know you got some feedback from Mitch Horniker also before he left town. So we're anticipating 2 more meetings in the month of April to...
I mean, we'll see how we can sequence it based on people's schedules, but I would think at least a couple more meetings, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, one thing I would say is that you just all expressed unequivocal support for the COLA. Perhaps you could agree on that today, because Mitch also expressed support for that, so I don't think he would have any problem with it. And there's 4 of you anyway. So that's something maybe you could act on. I think what I heard, and I just want to recap what I heard and where we'll take it from here to make sure you guys are on board with where we would head in the next meeting, I guess. So first on the COLA, do you want to entertain I mean, do you want to vote, or do you, I don't know, not sure why you wouldn't, but.
Want a motion, that's fine.
I think you would need to vote on it if you want to do it, yeah.
Okay.
So moved. On the COLA.
Second.
Okay. Any further discussion? So it's a COLA of 2.1% for the next 2 years.
Okay.
All in favor, say aye. Aye.
And as you make the other decisions, we can, in terms of funding, we can estimate out what that looks like for, it might be slightly more than that.
Okay.
If you decide to increase grants or give additional grants. So it sounds like you would like, it sounds like I've heard some level of consensus about the foster care, and child abuse, because those are kind of listed out already as to what the ranges would, at least as far as what people wanted to do. Does that make sense? Or do you, I mean, I guess I'm not sure how you want to proceed on that, in the sense that these were the only examples that were, the child abuse and foster care were the only examples where there was some sort of prior agreement by the committee about what they want, or, you know, that's how your votes, if you will, and your slate stacked up to support certain things. Do you want to look at additional information regarding those grants and whether to increase them, or in deciding how you might want to increase them? So it would be helpful to know if you want additional information on that, I guess.
Well, one question on that. So I didn't go back and look through all of my material from previous decisions. So in the area, for example, of early childhood, there weren't any cases there where there were those differences?
There were not. So the reason that that child abuse prevention, intervention, and foster care were brought forward to you all is because those were the two areas where that type of disagreement was evident in your individual preferences compared to how the votes actually came out. So for example, in mentoring in early childhood, there wasn't that variation in your individual preferences. So
same in after school.
Yeah.
So what you're asking, Lisa, if I understand, is what information we would need to, because several of these have a range of the difference, you know, $200,000 to $300,000. How are we going to? And as I wasn't here for that voting, I don't know how.
Well, I'm just wondering whether you want additional information on these. I mean, in other words, you talked about wanting to understand how much of requested versus received in general that a grant was awarded. I think we also talked about, the things like score level. We can certainly give you, who was culturally specific and who was serving East as well. I mean, for instance, I don't have to give you any of that if you prefer that I not. But I can, those kind of things. You can look at a stack of lenses, if you will, through which you might look at the different grants. I understand that with the hunger grants, the 3 hunger grants that we listed were 2 out of 5 people, and the other ones were at least 3 out of 5 people wanted to do something that wasn't done. That is a more clear-cut case of considering them, because you have some vote. There was a past vote to do something that didn't actually happen. The other ones would be opening up on a different basis, right? There was no particular movement on the part of the committee to want to do something that it didn't do. Now that might have just been because you are under constrained resources, and that's what the decisions you made. So that I'm not trying to say that you wouldn't want to increase those grants. I'm just saying I have nowhere to go other than to start at the beginning, and you could look at them again.
Right. When I went back and did my research, Salvation, these 2 were the biggest, where there was the biggest split or gap in there was because we had run out of funds, resources. They were toward the end, so they pretty much got what was left. And so that's why there was these 2 big gaps in the last 2.
Yeah.
Right, and so there's requested versus received, right? That as long as we give that for all of them, we could do that. I guess I just am wondering, do you want additional information in the child abuse and foster care or in hunger, where those were more clear-cut cases about what people had wanted to do and couldn't do? Does that make sense? In other words, we can provide you more information other than what we just gave you. That's more or less what I'm asking. Do you want us to give you the full, other additional pieces of information about those grants?
I think probably since you weren't here, that background information on where people...
We can give you the score sheets, and we can recut them based on the bases that we talk about. Just do it for everybody.
So Julie, you were asking for what was requested versus what was received, and don't we have that in front of us for these?
I had asked the question because I was curious about the other organization, the other areas.
Well, I think we're talking about, I want to just clarify something because I'm hearing 2 different things. Yeah. The analysis that Lisa Hansel did, for example, on the child abuse prevention, intervention, and foster care grants is unique to those program areas because there were several of you who wanted to do one thing and the vote maybe came out a different way. Alongside that, there are also cases there where an applicant asked for a certain amount of money and didn't get it. That condition or that circumstance is true in all the other program areas too, but the variation in your individual opinions and how the vote turned out in other program areas is not a situation that occurred in the other program areas. So what I would like to hear clarification on is, are we only talking about additional information being prepared for you all for child abuse prevention, intervention, foster care, and hunger relief? Or do you also want to know this question about amount of money awarded versus requested for the other program areas as well?
I would say yes, because even if we fully spend out all the options that you described here, there's still, we haven't, we're only at $6,565,000. So potentially we have, unless we put more into the early childhood. So I would appreciate seeing in the other areas the differences between what was asked for and what was funded,
Okay.
or what was recommended and what was awarded.
Well, we can give you three things. We can give you what the staff recommended in their rationale, so that's already, this is just giving you what we've essentially already prepared, right? So you can see that, and all the grantees, all the applicants saw all that information, as well as what was requested and received. So there's sort of three sets of numbers that you could look at, and that's fine. So it sounds like you want that across the board. That's what I'm hearing. So we can get that across the board. That's fine. And then we can run whatever other, do you want any other lenses other than those things that we just talked about?
There was a...
Like the performance to date.
Yes,
that we have.
performance to date. Anything that hasn't been discussed yet, I guess, is what I'm asking.
And, well, there was testimony about, we had a minimum grant amount of $50,000. There was testimony about bringing that up to $100,000.
That's
I'd like your,
tough thing to do.
to look at that and just tell us what your thoughts are.
Okay.
Particularly, I guess, if it's organizations where we ratcheted down. If they asked for 75,000 as opposed to 100, that's one thing. But if we, in our process, if we took them from 200 down to 80,000, I guess.
I'm thinking you're probably going to get from requested to received, you're going to get that anyway, honestly. And so you would be able to take them up at whatever level you wanted. I'm not sure you would, maybe you'd want to do more than 100. Depending on what they asked for and what you thought the merits were or weren't about that ask, whether you might want to increase it and by how much. So I think that trying to bring everybody in every program area up to that minimum when they didn't necessarily apply to get that, I think is maybe not the right way to go at this juncture.
No, I agree with
so
that.
I think it'd be easier to look at what was requested. At least then you know what did they structure their proposal around. And not everybody asked for 100, and there are organizations that are small where that would violate our 30% rule.
Oh, right.
So there's just a lot of variables going on there. I'm thinking that if you looked at the requested and the received, you're going to get to that basic principle of, hey, we wanted a lot more. We wanted to serve different schools. We wanted to do whatever with this, and we didn't get to do that. So you're going to arrive at that same answer in the end.
Okay, good point.
I just wanted to provide a clarification too around the document about the child abuse prevention, intervention, and foster care. This is a subset of each of those funding areas, just the ones where people wanted to fund at a higher level. So just that clarification. The list is longer in each of these funding areas.
Yeah. Well, we can give you this information plus other. Does that make sense? So we can give you the information on all of the folks in that category, and then this information on top of that in one piece, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So you can look at it all together. So do we think that you want to come together next time and do what? So we can get you all of this information, and you can look at it. The normal next step then is you create a slate of what you want to do. Okay, so we could do all of that before our next meeting. This is around the grant. This is around the current grantees or unfunded grantees piece, not around the other initiatives. So kind of to to Deborah's point that we didn't even, our preliminary allocations or preliminary options didn't even cover all of the funds that we have, right? There was additional money there that we didn't, set. Do you want to do that process first and then consider how much you want to put into other initiatives? Do you want to somehow do that all together? Do you see what I'm saying? So, do you want to? This is where the inability to talk to everybody ahead of time is difficult. So, in figuring out where do we want to head next in our next meeting, what decisions do we want to be prepared to make? Do we want to make decisions about at the macro level? We're sure that I heard a lot of support for the early childhood things here at the table today. So if we're sure that we want to do these investments in early childhood, do we want to then decide on that and then take whatever's left and apply it into either additional grants or increasing current grants? Do you want to do it in some other way? So that's kind of what I'm trying to get at. Or do we want to be prepared to decide which grants you want to either increase or fund from the last applicant pool at the next meeting. So do you want to do try to do all at the same time? That's a lot, that's a tall order in one meeting, I would think.
Are we imposing the $1 million ceiling on the applicant pool? No.
That was minimum. That was
Yeah, that's not a ceiling, that's more of a starting point.
That's just for those things discussed today.
That
That would be
would-
a minimum
yeah.
amount if you wanted to go with the options in the child abuse prevention, foster care, and the 3 hunger relief programs. That doesn't look at any of the other.
That does
things we
not look at
talked
any of
about.
the other ones, any other either unfunded or funded applicants that you want to increase.
In the other 3 program areas.
Yes,
as
in the
well.
other 3
And the
programs.
remainder of the programs in the child abuse and foster care
Right,
as well.
right.
So in terms of, I believe that there is consensus around the preschool expansion.
Sounded like it.
But we cannot necessarily agree or make a final decision on that, am I right, without knowing the capacity for our grantees to do this?
It seems to me you might, I mean, I haven't talked to any of them about this idea, so I would at least want to come back to you with, here are the things that they said they're willing to do, at what levels, and then you could make some decisions
Okay.
at that point.
But what about on the child care
Yeah.
initiative? I think we all agreed on that.
Same thing. I mean, I think I'd want to talk to the Child Care Resource and Referral of Multnomah County and try to just gauge, because it's also a completely different landscape with the state's work in child care quality right now than it was when this initiative happened before. So I'd want to understand a little bit better kind of what are some of the key considerations that we would need to look at in thinking about it all, and just hear from them kind of what their thinking would be on it.
So would you like us to prepare that for the next meeting so you can think about it? And do you want us to just, maybe what we should be doing is just another meeting which we're not necessarily going to make decisions, where we give you the more information and then we tee it up for the final meeting to make all the decisions then.
Or we could make decisions if it seemed consensus, so we're narrow, like we did today with the COLA, where we knew that there was consensus. If we come back next time and it seems like there's some areas that we can sign off on.
Sure.
Okay.
Sound good?
All right, that's good. We will come back with more information. I will contact partners that we work with in the systems level if they want to come and give you some idea of what that might look like. As far as quality improvement, technical assistance, those kinds of, and professional development, we can provide some more information about what that would look like. And if you want to hear from folks, I'm sure we could.
Yeah.
Well,
make that
great.
happen.
So thanks, everybody. We're in a very fortunate position, as was noted, to have additional resources to invest in Portland's children. And we do anticipate 2 more meetings before we make, to get to those decisions about how to invest those monies. And you can always follow, we'll keep you in the loop, and you can also always check on our website, portlandchildrenslevy.org. And thank you, and we stand adjourned.
Can I ask one more quick question? I'm sorry.
Sure.
When the information you're providing us with the 3 columns with the different dollars, could you also somehow make a mark if they were culturally specific or
We're gonna
east
do-
of 82nd? That would be really helpful.
Yeah, we'll do all those variables we discussed today. You'll get them all on one spreadsheet, basically, assuming we can fit it. And then you'll be able to take it all in together.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
See ya.